Okay, thank you very much, Karma, for that introduction. I'm going to go through the first half of the presentation, then hand over to Rob around 5 minutes' time. Next slide, please. So as Karma mentioned, this is the second of these reports that we've done. The first looks specifically at the cost benefits of smart or AMI metering for households. And this one examines the technology decisions that companies will need to make at PR24 for household metering. These are decisions which may well lock companies into a technology path for the next 15 years. And therefore, our report explores the impact of these decisions on future-proofing and enabling optionality. And we do this through comparing the long-term cost benefits of the different technologies, AMI and MR, exploring the resilience of these technologies to future challenges, assessing the impact on future regulatory performance commitments, and examining the potential of the additional data benefits of metering technologies. Next slide, please. So firstly, I want to go over some of the terminology regarding meters that we'll be discussing here today. And these are fairly established sort of definitions, but just to be a bit more specific, we talk about traditional or dumb meters, which are manually read once or twice a year, AMR meters, which short-range radio read meters, read twice a year via drive-by technology, and then AMI or advanced infrastructure meters. We are talking about reads being hourly in frequency and data transmitted back several times a day. Next slide, please. A key point from our report is that it is the data that delivers the benefits from metering rather than the meter itself. And part of the decision of which technology to use is driven by the level of ambition that you want to get from your metering. And you could consider this as sort of a lower ambition, mainly focusing on cost efficiencies of meter reads to reduce consumption and improve customer services. A slightly higher level, a medium level of ambition to drive further reductions in demand and giving customers wider access to their data, and really at a higher level of ambition, then fully integrating consumption, network and customer data to deliver enhanced services and increased resilience, maximizing the benefits right across the business. So this leads us to sort of think about household metering in a strategic and holistic way in line with long-term plans. Next slide, please. This shows in summary form what we found from the cost benefits part of our analysis. And that is, if you take this more strategic and holistic view, then AMI approaches are expected to be significantly more cost beneficial than other technologies across all levels of ambition. And this is primarily due to AMI's strengths in data with higher levels of read frequency and data granularity. And these maximize the benefits for consumption reduction and leakage efficiency and other benefits right across the business. Next slide, please. We also took a look at some of the wider benefits. By wider benefits, we're talking about adaptive planning, resilience, impact on performance commitments, and various other additional benefits. These benefits of AMI investments, therefore, are resilient to high impact future challenges. These might be in terms of population, climate change, anything else. And having gone through the past 2 years of COVID, we really don't know what's going to happen next. So future challenges are quite important. Smart metering technology can help companies improve their performance. And AMI technology can deliver a much wider range of benefits and optionality for companies. So this flexibility of being able to use data for future needs is quite important. And that brings us on to recommend that what we think water companies should analyze their metering investment choices in a more strategic and holistic way. And that these choices should align with a wider long-term strategy for engagement of all customers, integrating data from smart networks and for unlocking the power of data across the business. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Rob, who's going to take you through some of the additional recommendations we derive from this work.
Thank you very much, Dean. And I think where I want to start is very much where Dean just left off on that previous slide, which is identifying that we're making these decisions in the face of a great deal of uncertainty about what the future path will be, and also recognizing that AMI as a metering technology builds in optionality for how to deal with future events as they unfold. And what we know is that cost-benefit analysis, as the results we've shown, is really good at comparing different choices in with a given set of assumptions in a fairly static sense, where we're assuming the future is looking the same in both cases. It is less good at understanding the complexity of choices when we're dealing with those future uncertainties, and that's what we try to do with this second part of the study. And this very much builds on a core part of Ofwat's methodology for PR24, as they've outlined so far, which is asking companies to think about these investments with an adaptive planning. Sorry, should we go on the next slide? Thanks. Through an adaptive planning lens. And what this involves is thinking about investment decisions, which is trying to optimize the investment program over time in the face of uncertainty, minimizing the risk of stranded assets, or making investments which it turns out that you then regret, and therefore coming up with a plan overall which is a low regret option, and in particularly focusing on investments which are what we call enabling investments, which provide that optionality to respond and to meet the challenges in a variety of different circumstances. And this is illustrated in the figure in the slide, which is looking at a water resource planning choice between meeting a forecast capacity growth with a single large investment, or potentially a schedule of smaller resource schemes. And the large investment may have a lower NPV, a lower average incremental cost per unit capacity, but it is less flexible. And if demand actually turns out to be lower than the base case forecast, then the optimal strategy will have been the smaller schemes. We are uncertain about which those profiles will be. So the lesson from this is to consider the different scenarios and to understand which schemes may look good in a base scenario but very bad in alternatives, and then making choices based on that. And what Ofwat is expecting companies to do for PR24 is identify a core pathway of investments that focuses on these no regret, low regret investments, and in particular those that are required very much for the short-term needs, in which case the uncertainty is much less, or are required because they have that optionality. They keep options open. So what we try to do with this part of the study is think through a logical framework of how you would apply that adaptive planning approach to an investment in AMI and to water smart metering more generally. Not to complete that whole analysis, but at least to kind of set out how that would be done. So if you move into the next slide, please. The first part of that is to recognize that within the cost benefit tool that we had, there is still some further analysis that can be done. And particularly you can undertake sensitivity analysis by varying the input parameters for that. The Ofwat guidance to date has set out a set of reference scenarios that companies should include, not be limited to, but should include in their adaptive planning approach. And these include scenarios which have more challenging future trends, both in terms of higher demand for water, but also more challenging climate change positions. And we can model those through the cost benefit tool we did. We have just by using different assumptions to those scenarios. So for the adverse demand scenario, where demand growth is much higher, we can model that. In this case, we're just looking at the high ambition set of outcomes that Dean outlined, because in that world, companies would be focusing on how to get the most out of whichever metering technology they had. And then for the adverse climate scenario, we looked at different outcomes in terms of carbon prices and how that played through. And what the modeling results showed is actually that both AMR and AMI perform better in these more challenging scenarios, which is, I think, to be expected, given that they're focused on reducing demand. But that when you look at these more challenging scenarios, the case for AMI relative to AMR is strengthened because the benefit case increases more and the benefit cost ratios increase more than they would do for the AMR. But also that they, what it's showing is that AMI is resilient to these more challenging scenarios in the way that Dean referred to earlier. So if we move on to the next slide. So having looked at the sensitivity analysis and the modeling, then the final part was to just think through conceptually the other elements of an adaptive planning approach. And the starting point here is to think about that risk of stranded assets. And this is really focusing on what happens in scenarios which are more benign. If demand pressures are less, if climate pressures are less, the demands for sustainability reductions are less, and so on. Where would that lead us with these choices? And the first point, the way we would approach this is to think about the activities and investment decisions that companies need to make and divide them into different categories, and in particularly focusing on the asset lives of those decisions. And what we found is that certainly for companies that already have reasonable meter penetration or reasonable penetration of the boundary boxes for the meters, the core of those investments associated with metering, the meters themselves and the comms infrastructure, have relatively short asset lives. Certainly compared to alternatives such as desalination plants or new reservoirs. And what that means is, if you go down a particular path with a metering technology, with AMI, and then it turns out in 5-10 years' time that the conditions are more benign, you are locked into a existing decision for a much shorter period of time. You will have, the companies will have an opportunity to rephase their investments, and when it comes to replacement, after 15 years after the initial decision. And that greatly reduces the downside of investing now if benign conditions turn out. The second part of it is, if you like, the internal reorganization, the back office costs, the changes to the billing and the data handling systems. Now, for us, these are probably have elements of more permanent or certainly longer lasting changes for the companies. We're going to hear a lot more from the speakers later on about how they're using the data from doing it. And it's clear that there are changes to the way companies operate that need to be made to do that, and those changes may not be trivial, and they may involve some disruption. And that is a relevant factor for thinking it through the adaptive planning framework. Where we get to, though, is an understanding that if a company is looking ahead at all possible scenarios for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and recognizing that investment in that sort of reorganization, that sort of ability to handle data, whether it's from household meters or from network meters or from whatever it might be, if that is happening at some point and it's just a matter of when, then that's a relevant factor for thinking at the extent of this risk. If the downside is actually that with hindsight, you might have delayed it by a few years or an AMP cycle, then that is a downside risk that can be understood and can be managed. And I think we think it's highly likely that future, almost all plausible scenarios that one consider, companies will have to engage with this data and these technologies at some point in that time frame, and therefore the downside from that is very low. The second element is the optionality. So as Dean's already highlighted, investment in AMI provides optionality to meet those challenges, whether it's through innovation in tariffs, innovation in customer engagement, and innovation in the way that networks are managed. And that provides a variety of ways in which companies can respond to different conditions in the future. We also recognize that another potential reason for delaying an investment is the benefits of learning how to best use an asset. So if you like, a second or third mover advantage, and it's the people that first engage with technology that perhaps have to go through a steeper learning curve on how to do that. And again, and I think, again, it will become clear from listening to the presentations later on, that by 2025, if we're looking at the next AMP, there will be an increasing and fairly extensive body of evidence of how to get the best out of data in different circumstances. And so companies will be a lot further along that learning curve. And then the final part, that's thinking about what are the potential benefits of delaying and how material are they. The other side of that is the cost of delaying. And we know that companies face quite challenging targets for leakage reduction and for demand and PCC reduction into the 2030s. And that's going to come around fairly soon in the context of, again, of a 5-year investment planning cycle. Delaying it from one price control, one AMP to the next does increase that risk of being able to deliver against those challenging targets. Again, particularly in the context of, as we're seeing what other companies are already doing and progressing along those lines, and that evidence of what they're doing will be available for regulators to see and to challenge everyone else. So if we go to the last slide then, please. So just then in summary, what we found is that AMI can enable significantly greater benefits for customers and society than AMR. Companies can be more ambitious in both the scale and scope of the benefits that they can achieve. Also, that there are wider benefits through improved customer experience, additional customer insight, and even helping customers in vulnerable circumstances by using that data. And these benefits are resilient to both high impact future scenarios, and AMI shows greater adaptability than AMR. And therefore, in our view, AMI is a low regret investment under that adaptive planning framework. So our further recommendations would be that companies should account for these wider benefits and optionality that AMI provides when they think it through an adaptive planning approach. One can recognize that the internal investment of the organization needed can be material, but the benefits that the drive from AMI are likely to be part of a wider data strategy where companies are having to engage with that reorganization in any event, and therefore it's very unlikely to be a stranded cost linked to the AMI decision. And companies should consider carefully the risks of delaying that decision and how that will affect their ability to deliver the leakage and consumption reduction targets that are being set and to be achieved during the 2030s. So thank you very much. I hope we kept to time, and we look forward to answering any questions when we get to the Q&A. Thanks, Karma.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Dean and Rob. Great start to the webinar, really fascinating research. And I think that clear conclusion that AMI investment is a low regrets investment is something we all need to really take away from that talk. But we're going to move straight on now to get some of the water company perspectives. So we're going to start with Doug Spencer. He is head of smart metering at Anglian Water and has led the programme to take Anglian from proof of concept to company-wide rollout of AMI. So very qualified to give us his views. So over to you, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you, Karma, and good morning all. If we head straight to the next slide. The challenge for Anglian Water was very clear. We start to run out of water. WRMP 19 indicated to us very clearly. The figures that are shown there, our average daily input into distribution is about 1,100 megalitres per day. At peak, 1,400 megalitres per day. So you can see there that the deficit effectively meant 1 in 10 of our customers have no water come 2045, according to WRMP 19. Smart metering, the mechanisms are well established as to how we get to drive down that demand side piece. The biggest impact we have found, and it came as no surprise, is through customer side leakage. The bonuses that we get alongside that, customer satisfaction, the customers' access to data, a smoother billing piece, and a better ability to deal with customers' property inquiries. But also a sort of almost certainly once in 3 AMP opportunity to go out there and check the location and state of all of our assets. And it starts to open the door on smart networks. In terms of outcomes, this also brings up another challenge around change in your organization. Despite all of the stakeholder management and all of the briefings, you will be amazed how many of your fellow experienced water professionals don't get that installing 1 million meters that produce 24 pieces of data a day
are surprised by the fact that this is going to generate a lot more work around the company. The example we've got there, customer leakage. The blue bars, where we established the customer leakage support team back in 2013, we were dealing with 6,000-7,000 leaks a year. And you can see over its 9 years of operation, that's slowly crept up to about 8,000 or 9,000 leaks a year. That's on an overall measured populace of about 1.8 million and 300,000 odd unmeasured. You can see the orange bars start to appear with the tiny number of 6,500-7,000 meters in Newmarket in 2017, then bringing in Norwich in 2018. By the time we started fitting in Anger in 2020, we were already doubling the number of leaks, customer leaks that we found. And last year, 2020, 2021, nearly 70,000. We're sitting at the moment at the end of April last financial year. So this year, 330,000 meters fitted. We're now sitting at 360,000 meters fitted. If it wasn't for the global micro component shortage, we would be sitting another 60,000 higher than that. Next slide, please. No reason not to get a good excuse in early. Another challenge of smart metering is dealing with the data. Andrew and Tim's been at this 5 years longer than us and have got some really polished data systems. We are in the process of building ours, and we are about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through tranche 2. So we have our customer portal, we have revenue reads, we have basic customer leakage. We now have high-level leakage reporting, water balance reporting, and we've got some basic performance reporting, and we're hoping that we'll have our full-on customer leakage tool come August of this year. We're yet to deliver asset management and income tariffs pieces, and in terms of benefits capture, my team are still having to operate in Excel and Access, which, given that our meter population is going to be producing about 10 billion reads a year by the end of this AMP, is starting to stretch some fairly creaky infrastructure for us. Next slide, please. Hence, we're still having to use our trial areas as our bellwether, as our pine cone for smart meter performance. But what you see there is the story of the two Norwich and Newmarket installs and the customer leakage that we found and dealt with since then. Where these are only the leaks that we've positively identified as definitely a plumbing loss and internal leak in the blue line, and customer service pipe leakage in the red line. Across the top there, you've got a few events that happened during the period of this. What it indicates to us very strongly was we had smart meter techs dedicated to the trial, and where we had those dealing with customers going and visiting properties, we could drive down leakage very successfully. The summer of 2018 took those away from us to deal with issues that we had in supply demand in Colchester, and we kind of stalled during that period. But bringing in new methods of talking to our customers, dealing with our customers, letter-based information going out to customers. The reason the graph is in two pieces is the first one finishes at the end of the AMP, at the end of the trial, and the second one picks up where the two areas just went into our business as usual process. And you can see for the last several months, we've pretty much eradicated those known leaks. Now, alongside that, we have unknown leaks. Leaks that customers are not speaking to us about. Sometimes they fix them of their own volition and we never get to find out where it was, and some of those are outstanding. But in broad terms, we had a leakage figure, including those unknown leaks, sitting up around 36,000 litres per hour at its peak, which is pretty much the discovery phase in Norwich. We're now sitting at 5,500. We've had a large leap up from 3,500, which we're fairly certain is a customer service pipe leak. But either way you cut it, even with those unknown leaks, even where we're not managing to get good dialogue with our customers, we're reducing leakage by 85 to 90% on customer side. Next slide, please. So another area that we're looking for smart metering to make a difference to our company is in the efficiency of leakage targeting. DMA leakage, I joined our leakage team way back in 2006 and then came over to metering in 2016. And I can remember sitting at conference, I can remember sitting in workshops at work with our allowance-based targeting processes of, right, we've got 1,000 properties, they should be using this quantity of water at night line. If the DMA meter shows high, go in and sweep it. If the DMA meter shows low, leave it alone. Alongside that, well, yeah, but those DMAs we know always look low, but there are leaks, so go in. It was all very manual. It was all very, very ropey. Well, now that we have smart metering, DMA there on the left, 99.9% penetration, we will spot immediately whether that DMA has a leak. And more importantly, we can evidence that there is no need to waste the money that we are paid by our customers sending leak technicians into that DMA to find something that's not there. On the right-hand side, 85% penetration. We're yet to really start our non-household large diameter meter process in anger. So we have a number of DMAs where the gap is pretty much always non-household. But there we go, January of this year, gigantic burst kicked up. Unfortunately, of course, smart metering very good at spotting bursts, but it's not that great at locating them, and it can't help you with TMA road closures and repairs in the slightest. So it took us a long time to bring that leak back under control, but immediately we knew that that DMA had an issue about it. Worth noting in these two graphs, you'll see that there is a general trend down. Okay, July through to May. But what we found is the impact that we're having on customer leakage is starting to now turn up in our DMA night lines. If we go for the next slide on, please. Here we have a particular DMA where we've been able to correlate immediately the 0.3 litre reduction that we've generated from customer leaks, known and identified customer leaks, has turned up in the DMA flow, and you can see there in the light blue the DMA flow dropping over the period of time, absolutely in line with the customer leakage. So the impacts that we're having are really positive in terms of bringing down the overall demand. Start to see evidence of that. Next slide, please. As I said, we're very much limited in terms of our analytics process at the moment, but this gives an overall summary up to this was end of May, and this shifts on a weekly basis. With the number of meters that we're seeing now on our general rollout, we're seeing sort of 0.5 megalitre a week added to the leak resolved value. It moves so rapidly, but huge numbers of leaks. What's been really heartening, for a number of years, we've all sat at conference talking about having to push customers to repair their leaks. Well, it shows quite clearly there, the vast majority of our customers repair their leaks before we even speak to them. One of the outstanding questions and queries here is leak runtime. We can quantify the size of the leak. We can identify where we've had an interaction with a customer to let them know they've got a leak and it's generated a repair. What we don't know is when that leak would have been repaired without smart metering. Now, I think it's fair to say, given the volume of leakage that we found in the discovery phase in Newmarket and Norwich, and the figures that we're getting back from our rollout, which suggest just over 8% of properties have a leak when we go there. Now, whilst Anglian has a very good proactive leakage program, we have to acknowledge the fact that in terms of customer leaks, the likelihood is that I think at least 50% of plumbing losses and customer service pipe leaks continue on without us ever seeing them, and that's the size of the prize in terms of a smart meter picking up that kind of leakage. Final slide, please. So the final piece in terms of the benefits generation for us, on that last slide, at the moment we quantify the overall impact of leakage about 6.7 litres per property of customer service pipe leakage, and 12 litres per property in plumbing loss. So for every smart meter that we put in, we pull getting on for 19 litres of customer service pipe leakage. Apologies, final slide. So the final piece then is behavioural, and this has been the toughest piece to quantify because there are all kinds of variables. So what you have here are the traces of our Newmarket measured, so customers paying on measured volume as the yellow line. The blue line is our Newmarket weather model. So this is our corporate PCC model adapted for the population and properties of Newmarket. And the red line is our survey of domestic consumption, which has been around in various shapes and forms pretty much since 1992. And what we've looked to do is compare what the smart meters were doing at the start of the process and before we installed against what they've done since. And the headlines are that in Newmarket, consumption was about 6% higher than it is on SODCON. In Norwich, it was only marginally higher than it is on SODCON. By the time we had finished our interventions and COVID started, and COVID, of course, has completely wrecked all of the consumption data for us, we'd taken both of those down to about 7% under. So a huge swing in new market. And we're looking at about 13% swing in new market and about an 8% swing in Norwich. Now, this data, of course, includes the plumbing loss and the customer service pipe leakage that we've taken out. So what we have to then do is derive, well, what remains is behavioural. And that suggests to us that we're looking at about 2.5 to 3% of behavioural reduction. Now, that's on measured customers. So these were customers that had visual read meters before, switched to AMI. We have similar data on unmeasured customers, what we call meter fitted non-chargeable. We've still got about 350,000 of those in our company, where we can look at the consumption, but the customer still pay on rateable value. The savings there are huge, and it has been a bit of head scratching for us because there's no reason for a customer paying rateable value to reduce their consumption. But it rather complicates things. So we would rather, in terms of generating our figures, look at our measured customers. The chart at the bottom there shows the percentage deflection of both new market and Norwich over the period of time. And here's one of the question marks we've got about the longevity of the savings. And I think really we've just got to see what happens as COVID restrictions come off and we start to move back to work again, because they seem to have quite an impact on our customers. Last month there I would ignore because we know that our SODCON data was a little bit ropey. And that is it from me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Doug. Really insightful there about the real world benefits of, particularly obviously on leakage, the various strands of leakage there. So thank you ever so much for that. And we're going to move on now to hear from Andrew Tucker, Thames Water's Water Demand Reduction Manager. I'm sure you know Thames was the first mover in this field, and Andrew is responsible for the strategic direction of water savings through metering, water efficiency and customer engagement. So over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. If we skip to the first slide. Hi, everyone. Just a quick scene set. The dark blue areas, that's where we are down the bottom of the country. The dark blue areas on the map on the right-hand side are our supply areas. So we are providing clean water for about 10 million people. So it's a big and growing population. Next slide. The growing population bit is our challenge. So this graph illustrates a gap between what we can, what water availability we might have through to the end of the century and the growing population's demand, lots of mouths to feed. Essentially, we've got to increase the bottom line with new water resources, but bring that top line down, reduce leaks, reduce demand from household and non-household. Smart metering is the enabler that underpins most of that work. Next slide. We are rolling out a compulsory metering program. We selected to go to AMI some years ago. We're about 7 years into it or so. We're using a census digital meter plus an Arqiva fixed network, and over 650,000 smarts in the ground. 35,000 plus businesses have now got a smart meter in there too. So we're getting data on household and commercial consumption, leakage and usage. Next slide. Headline figures. I won't go to everyone, but just pick and choose a few there. But basically, the smart meters so far are seeing a 12 to 17% reduction in demand. We'll know we'll be able to probably extend that number a little bit higher once we really go to town, as Doug already alluded to, around behaviour change. Behaviours is the tougher sell. It's a much more difficult thing because we may not be necessarily just talking about behaviour change. It's actually almost cultural change. Some of these demand reduction targets, whether it's national, regional, or down to a water company, water resource management plan, you're almost down to the households doing something better every day. Continuous flow, at least 8% of all of our homes are continuously flowing. The big new number is around about a quarter of all the water that is being delivered to businesses is showing up as continuous flow. I'll let that sink in. Some of it might just be a little bit of genuine usage around the clock operations, but we're also seeing from our water efficiency work on businesses and extra smart meter data analysis, huge chunk of water consumption in businesses, leaky loos and uncontrolled urinals. We've got to work with the sector to try and engineer that out of existence. Next slide, please. Household stuff. So next one. Okay. As I said before, we're seeing up to about a 17% reduction in demand from going from unmeasured to smart metered. We will push more behavior change, engagement, proactive engagement as time goes on. But essentially over time, there's the last 4 years of household consumption, and you saw, and broken down by household types, flats, terraces, semi-detached, detached. There's quite a huge range between a standard house. What is a standard house? And then each year you come up with very, very percentage differences, huge changes in consumption based on temperature, based on pandemics, based on government restrictions. So when you then divide it by a estimated population number, you take a very variable number and make it into a very estimated number through PCC. But smart metering is now giving us this insight. Next slide, please. Okay, the average person does not use the average PCC. It's a metric that's unfortunately misused pretty badly. And we need to use data and insight and real intelligent sort of recommendations to move away from something that has got some fundamental flaws. But what's really, really critical in this graph is to show that there's a long tail of very high users. We have households that might be a 2-bed or a 3-bed terrace house, identical to the one next door, which is only using 300 litres per house per day, but that particular house might be using 7,000 litres a day. Why? Smart meters may not tell us exactly what is going on, but at least it pinpoints and enables us to target communication, water efficiency interventions far better than average. So a small number of high users skews the average number. Most households are pretty efficient, but it doesn't mean to say that there aren't opportunities on every street and every DMA to bring down demand. Next slide. Okay, we've been doing water efficiency visits en masse for many, many years. Through smart meter data and the analytics of that, we're able to target them better. So instead of going to absolutely everyone, including the really efficient low water users, where you actually don't get much of a saving, sometimes your water efficiency interventions increases consumption. But the simple thing is anything over 500 litres per house per day is fair game and really fantastic cost benefit driven demand reductions. And the higher the consumption in that household, the greater the opportunity. Simple things, device improvement, behaviour change, stop the wastage. Next slide, please. The blue line in the middle on that graph is the average savings that we've been getting recently from our in-home retrofit schemes, our smarter home visits. The dark blue bar next to it is what we were achieving per visit before we were able to target using smart meters. The green line is when we did some stuff during lockdown. We did it virtually, just on behavior change only. So what it shows is that behavior change plus the retrofit of water efficiency devices and fixing constant flows of wastage, leaky loos, dripping taps, that sort of demand reduction. When you're able to target those interventions on the households that have high usage, you get a much better yield. And so far, our water efficiency visits reduced demand in those homes by an average of about 10% reduction, which is great. Next slide, please. Okay, Doug mentioned around the measurement of sustained. Are our savings from meters going in the ground, engagement with those customers, or our water efficiency interventions, are those savings being sustained? So far, after sort of 4 years, or 3 to 4 years of really, really deep dive data analysis, they are being sustained, which is really great. And it's essentially on both those graphs there, the gap between the light gray line and the dark line at the bottom there, that gap is being maintained. Which is fantastic. We're going to keep monitoring this. Everyone will need to have a look at this thing in the long term. But so far, we're able to sustain those savings, and we are hoping that with better proactive engagement going forward, we might be able to enhance them still. Next slide, please. On businesses. Okay, it's great to build a bit of a benchmark. We're working with Mosul, we're working with other water companies to understand benchmarking. How much do different sectors actually use? What's average? What's normal? What's bad? So smart meters is enabling us to build up that data insight as to what types of sectors or business operations actually use. Next slide. But the big thing is how much they lose. So roughly a quarter of all, as I said before, a quarter of all the water going into a business at the moment is showing as continuous flow. Our definition of continuous flow through a meter is anything that's more than 1 litre an hour continuously for at least 2 weeks. Some of it might be, around the clock usage. but a lot of it we think is uncontrolled urinals, leaky loos, and general wastage leaks. We've got to work with retailers, we've got to work with individual sectors to raise this agenda, get the message out there, get this stuff quantified, and get this stuff fixed. Smart metering is an enabler. It doesn't solve the problem. It helps us identify, quantify, and target. Next slide, please. Okay, what next? This is a big thing. We've been working with the Smart Meter Advisory Group, trying to better quantify what types of cost categories need to go into a smart meter program. On the left-hand side in the blue there is essentially some traditional things. We install meters in the ground. We put meters internally. There is a certain unmeterable ratio, households that just cannot physically meter. These are all things that are fairly well known. But when it comes to an enhancement case or your BOTEX, your base operating spend for an AMP, the green arrows there are all the extra things that a water company needs to consider and take account of the potential costs for enabling an actual smart metering program. So all that green stuff is different from a traditional cost model that may have been used in AMP 5 and 6 and so forth. You need to be having these, spend the money, invest in these types of capabilities. Going from dumb metering to smart metering is not like going from an old Nokia 3210 and buying an iPhone 13 or whatever. Okay, you need a lot of back-end stuff, data analytics, data storage, smart meter operations center, actioning, turning that insight into an action, going fix leaks or engage with customers. This is new. So you've got to take this into account. And what we've been doing, if you just go to the next slide, is we're advising through the Smart Meter Advisory Group, all water companies to take a consistent approach, because you'll often get benchmarked against things that you shouldn't be benchmarked during a price review process. So in the blue, just click one more time, in the blue, we're recommending that when it comes to the meter unit rate, they're the types of cost categories you get included in your meter unit rate. But to enable a proper smart meter program, please don't forget these types of costs, because you'll find yourself needing to have these capabilities to properly make use of the actual data. Next slide, please. Okay, and just to finish off here, our plan, so we're going to finish off our stuff in AMP7. So we've got around 600,000 or so meters plus. We want to get in green economic recovery in the Thames Valley. We're exploring smart systems. Next AMP, in AMP8, it'll probably be around the 1 million smart meter installation mark. On the policy side, you've got things like mandatory labelling coming, national water target, blending water energy efficiency together. So those things should drive this agenda, not just on a water company. So Karma, back to you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Andrew. Tour de force. We've spoken before, but I think those continuous flow numbers are shocking. And perhaps we can come back to that and the costing side of things you mentioned at the end there in the Q&A. Just a quick reminder on the Q&A, we've had half the talks now, so we've got another 3 more talks, so please do start putting your questions in. I can see we've got some coming in, so thank you for those. But we will move straight on now to Nathan Richardson, who is Head of Strategy and Policy at WaterWise, which is the UK's leading water efficiency NGO. I'm proud to say it's a board that I sit on, so great to see Nathan on the agenda, and he's going to talk about smart metering and the new UK water efficiency strategy. So over to you, Nathan. Thank you.
Thanks, Karma. Some great insights already today. So what I'm going to talk about is how smart metering is a key enabler in the new UK water efficiency strategy that's just out for consultation through till July the 8th. And for those who don't know WaterWise, we're the UK's leading water efficiency NGO. We're a small not-for-profit, and we work for the water sector, governments, regulators, and other stakeholders to promote the efficient use of water. And if we can do that, then we can help address water scarcity risks, we can reduce energy use, we can reduce carbon emissions, we can benefit the environment, and we can save people money. So it's a win, 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 I think. So we back in 2017, we launched the first 5-year UK water efficiency strategy, and it set out how we might make progress across around 60 actions and these 7 themes that are on the slide here. There was a steering group set up to help maintain momentum, and to help spread best practice, coordinate research, join up advocacy. And we've really sort of led the charge on things like water labelling and leaky loos and smart metering as well. And in terms of metering, the 2017 version of the strategy called for the government in England to remove remaining restrictions on full metering, and also for a faster rollout of meters, particularly smart meters. And I think looking back, it's reasonable to say there's been a bit of progress on both aspects since 2017, but nowhere near enough as what we actually need. Next slide, please. So the current UK water efficiency strategy is 5 years old. So over the last 12 months, WaterWise has been working with a task and finish group to develop a new strategy. We did an initial consultation last autumn, and that confirmed our view that water scarcity remains a crucial issue, that the new strategy is needed, that it should cover the whole of the UK, and that it should run to 2030. And it also highlighted how a broad range of stakeholders need to play their part if we're going to succeed in reducing demand. Since the autumn, we've held some online workshops in each of the 4 UK countries, and we also included a session at the WaterWise conference in March, a forward-looking session, where we heard from a range of different voices about what they thought needed to be in the new strategy. So the draft strategy is now out for consultation, which is really exciting, and we'd love to get your feedback on it. And we're also interested to gauge your whether you'd like to get involved and how you'd like to get involved in helping us deliver it. And we plan to launch it in mid-September. So next slide, please. So while we've been developing the strategy over the last year or so, we've seen a raft of evidence and policy statements on smart metering that have happened in parallel. And I thought it'd be useful just to put them on this slide and sort of quickly run through them. So yeah, going back to February 2021, the new water resource planning guidance was published in England, requiring smart meter scenarios to be considered with much more detail now needed on companies' metering programs and the types of meters that they intend putting in. Moving forward to March 21, at the WaterWise conference, we heard some early evidence from Andrew and others on the water saving benefits that they were starting to see from their rollouts. In April, we published a paper with Arqiva, which highlighted the climate change benefits of metering, both in terms of supporting adaptation, but also reducing emissions and reaching net zero. If we roll forward to November 21, we had a similar number to today sort of registered on a webinar that we organised, where we heard about insights and benefits of rollout from the water companies, plus the research on the cost benefits, and also some social research that WaterWise did, looking at customer attitudes. In March 2022, the DEFRA's Senior Water Demand Reduction Group wrote to the Minister Powell, calling for faster smart meter rollout and for a date to be set for full meter coverage. In March 2022, we also saw Water UK's route map for leakage reduction, which had a big role in it for smart metering and smart networks to reach the 50% leakage reduction commitment. In April, we had Mosul publishing research looking at the positive business cases for non-household metering. We also saw Ofwat amending its draft long-term planning guidance and bringing forward the dates for full smart meter penetration that companies should use in their forward planning. And then lastly, DEFRA, in their recent document setting out expectations for water resource plans, went as far to say that smart meters should be the standard meter installed. So it's been quite a journey over the last year or so, and all this in the time that we've been developing the strategy. And this progress is sort of testament to a lot of the efforts of the people on this call and speaking today. But from a water efficiency and a demand management perspective, this is hugely positive. Next slide, please. And the reason I say it's hugely positive is because smart metering and the data and insights that it provides is a key enabler for water efficiency and demand management. It really is a game changer. And it supports the delivery of pretty much all of the 2030 strategic objectives that we developed in the new water efficiency strategy that are shown on this screen. These are the 10 objectives that we've got. So yeah, smart metering and the data supports pretty much all of these. The most obvious one is the link with objective 2, which is all about putting useful, timely information on water use into the hands of household and non-household water users, along with the potential for savings. But it also supports many of the other objectives too. For example, smart meter data can help us measure the benefits of interventions that we've just heard about, such as smart meters, such as water retrofits and home visits. So we know what works, and we know how long the savings last. It allows us to start to evaluate the benefits of water saving campaigns and messages based on the amount of water that's saved and not just on the reach on social media. Smart meter data can inform programs to find and support vulnerable customers, for example, those with very high usage or very low usage. And as we've already heard, it can definitely help identify customer side leakage and get to grips with leaky loos, saving customers water and money. And smart meter data can help us all better understand and value the water that we use. If people don't know how much water they use, or if it simply isn't measured, it makes it so much harder to engage with them and motivate them to save some of it. And in our research at WaterWise, we found that people on smart meters are twice as likely to take action to save water as those who are unmetered. On a personal note, I got my letter from Anglian Water last month telling me that I'm getting a smart meter in the next few weeks, and I can't wait, and I'm looking forward to being able to share some of my personal experiences firsthand on that. Next slide, please. So what does the new UK water efficiency strategy call for? Well, it has 3 headline things in it. Firstly, we need to speed up the rollout of smart meters to both household and non-household customers. Let's get on with it. Let's get all homes and businesses, at least in England, on smart meters before 2035. The second thing is we need to put timely, useful information on consumption into the hands of water users in a clear, attractive, easy to use and understand format, alongside more tailored advice and support. And then thirdly, we need to use the data and insights that smart meters can provide to help assess, justify, and prioritize demand reduction efforts, reducing some of the current uncertainty that there is around delivering demand side reductions in water use. So if you agree, and even if you don't, then please do respond to the current strategy consultation. And if you've got a role to play, if you're interested in helping us deliver it, please do flag that as well. You've got until 8th of July. Thank you very much. Cheers, Karma.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nathan. I'm sure a lot of people on this call will want to respond. So great to share that link there. And yeah, just add my words to Nathan's. Please, all views are very welcome there. So we're going to move on now to look at the non-household market and what's happening with metering, smart metering in there. So please welcome Martin Hall. He's the programme lead for the strategic metering review at Mosul. So thanks, Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Karma. It's always a challenge, I think, talking later on these presentations, in that you hope no one else has covered all the points you want to make. And I think there have been a few references to the non-household metering side of the business, but let's build on some of those now. So next slide, please. We're going to argue 2 things here. One, that the non-household market is different. But secondly, I think we're going to argue that it should be treated in much the same way as the household market. So how does it differ? Let's start with that. There are 1.2 million eligible customers in the non-household market. And interestingly, there's about 70 organisations or trading parties involved. That's wholesalers and retailers. The non-household market continues to consume about 3 billion litres of water. It's about 30% of the consumption in England and Wales. So it's a significant amount of consumption in the non-household side. What's interesting, though, is that most of the non-household customers are very small. They're similar in the way in which they use water to households. They have the same size meter, so they're typically 15, 20 millimeters. But looking at the other end of the consumption profile, the very largest customers, so the top 1% of customers in terms of consumption use about half of the water used in the non-household market. And the top 3% use about 70%. And if we look at it in terms of meters, meters that are not typically household type of meters, but the larger meters, i.e. those 20 millimeters and above, those above 20 millimeters, they account for about 85% consumption in the non-household market. So you can sort of start to see perhaps where some of the focus ought to lie. So we think there's an ideal opportunity, and I think that's been supported by the previous speakers, for water efficiency interventions to address the timing and or volume of consumption. Okay, next slide, please. Dean covered this in his presentation, so I'm not going to cover this in any great detail, but obviously, we have traditional meters, AMR meters, walk by, drive by, and fixed network meters. And I think that's the sort of focus really of where we are, sort of enhanced metering technology. Next slide, please. So we've asked a question within the market, who benefits from enhanced metering? Next slide, please. The sort of argument we want to put forward is that everyone benefits from having better quality data. So just to sort of define that in a bit more detail, we've recently completed a piece of research with Artesia Consulting, and we've looked at what are the benefits of introducing improved or enhanced metering technology, particularly from a data point of view. And as you can see from this slide, there are significant benefits for retail customers, for the wholesalers, the water companies, for the retailers, the 45 or so retailers that are out there in terms of managing the process, and from the model and the way in which we manage the market. And just to sort of really sort of focus, there are, on top of this, significant other environmental and carbon reduction benefits that we've not picked up directly here. Next slide, please. Currently, can you go back one slide, please? Currently, wholesalers are responsible for the meters. They own the meters. They are responsible for maintaining the meters. And as an owner of this asset, we think there is a strong benefit case for wholesalers to invest in improving the technology to introduce either AMR or Smart, which we'll come on to in a minute. And the cost benefit probably stands within the wholesaler sort of space alone, even though wholesalers are not responsible, as it says at the bottom there, for reading the meters. So we feel there is a strong benefit case for wholesalers to invest in improved technology in the non-household market. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of the work that Artesia did for us, there's sort of four main outcomes. First of all, there is a strong benefit case for water companies to roll out enhanced metering technology to all non-household customers in the market. Where companies are planning to upgrade or roll out smart metering for domestic customers, we believe they should absolutely do the non-household customers at the same time. That might sound obvious, intuitive, but actually there are a number of wholesalers who said they're not going to do that. They were just going to focus on the household. So we think we'd like to see that a change. Companies that don't have large-scale meter investment programs at PR24, we also think there is a benefit for replacing or upgrading selected non-household meters in PR24, particularly those for the largest customers, where businesses are in close proximity or where meters are hard to read. And the final thing is, we feel that there is a real need in this market for a common data standard for sharing consumption data. And that's a piece of work that we'll be working on during this financial year. Next slide, please. What the work has shown us is that there is sort of two elements of meters in the market. So less than 25 millimeter, more like domestic meters. That's 87% of the meters in the market, or just over 1.1 million. And we think, you know, there is a definite business case for those to be AMR or AMI. However, the larger meters, 25 millimeter and above, that's about 13% of the meters, 165,000. We believe all of those should be made smart as soon as possible. And there are some challenges there because obviously there are different drivers. Wholesalers we'd like to see invest, but at the same time, it is possible that the retailer may wish to invest or the customer may wish to invest. And I think there's a little challenge around those three different options about how we actually make this work. Next slide, please. As I said, that just reminds us that 13% account for 85% of the consumption market. So we really think this is where we need to focus. We want to really introduce water efficiency. So sort of drawing this presentation towards this end, our view is that there is an increasing consensus. I think you can see that from the previous speakers to this webinar, that action is required. However, we still think, particularly for the non-household, there is more agreement on timescales and mechanisms. We're concerned that you know, some of the wholesaler plans, we may still not see smart meters for those larger meters for another 10, 12 years away. We think there is a need for clear roles and responsibilities between wholesalers, retailers and customers, and that is something that we're continuing to work on. We believe PR24 is vital, but it's not the only route. As I said, customers and retailers can also invest in add-on equipment to meters to make them smart. And we think there is a number of blockers that ought to also be considered within the market. As I said, we're very keen that if a wholesaler is collecting hourly data through a smart meter, that there then is a really effective and efficient process for that data to be shared with either the retailer or the customer or a third party. And to do that, we think we need both sort of the trading positions in place to enable that to happen and a standard sharing format for the data so that the data can be shared between those parties cost effectively and quickly. I think our view is there's a lot to do here, and there's all parties involved in this seminar can certainly help, and we'd really like you to get involved. Okay, I think that was the final slide. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Martin. It's fascinating how the household and non-household markets might act together in this endeavour. We'll perhaps talk about that in the Q&A. But finally, thank you for your patience, everyone. We are now going to move on to our final presentation, after which we'll go to the Q&A. So just a quick reminder to add any questions you would like in there now so that we can hit the ground running. But finally, we're going to hear from Peter Baker. He's the Director of Smart Utility Networks at Arqiva. For those who don't know, Arqiva is a communications infrastructure and media services company. It's the only large-scale provider of smart water infrastructure in the UK, and to date has installed over 1 million connected water smart meters. So that's quite a milestone. So over to you, Peter, for the final presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Comma, and good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to cover this morning the sort of network infrastructure providers' point of view, and perhaps some of the questions for any water companies that should be asking when they're starting to embark either on their smart meter journey or look to expand it further. And I think, first of all, it's just worth reflecting on that probably everybody on this call, or a large number, or people that we engage with, are involved in the industry. And as such, we're very familiar with the types of challenges that are presented in order to reduce our overall water usage and meet some of the targets. I think what we need to remember as well that the general public and population will probably have a much lower awareness of some of these issues and actually how they can potentially engage as part of this debate about how to reduce consumption overall. Can we go on to the first slide, please? So firstly, we all know that there's a set of targets, and I think both Anglian, Thames and others have already covered those to a large degree, but most of these targets come from DEFRA through to Ofwat, and in order to meet targets, you've clearly got to be measuring what you're actually doing today and understand what your position is today. So we start off in a position where generally 60% of households actually do have a meter of some description of form, whether it's a mechanical dumb meter or whether it is something that's AMR, which is a drive-by style data reading device, or a fully smart meter, which provides sort of real-time data gathering information and capability. But the challenge here is that, as you can see on the left, your consumer is really looking at, well, what do I waste? What does that mean? And what usage actually do I have? And you know, if I'm cleaning my teeth, if I'm having a shower and so on, they really don't know. So you've got to start educating your consumers overall around, well, what is it that they actually are using? And potentially look at how you then engage with the customer to make suggestions about how to improve on that. And you've heard from Anglian Thames about some of the ways that they can do that. And I won't get into the debate around per capita consumption, but generally the overall ambition, of course, as part of water metering is to look at both identifying leaks and solving those as quickly as you can. And secondly, really engaging with your client as many times as you can to start talking about ways that they can be more efficient about their use of water overall. And this is particularly important right now because we're getting into a phase around PR24, as was mentioned a little earlier, and that will then set out the framework for the next 5 years up to 2030. And we will obviously be looking at PR29 as the next submissions, which is a very considerable way into some of the deadlines that have been set for achieving reduction targets. If we go on to the next slide, please. So when we started off on this journey, which I think with Thames was around 7 years ago or so, we really looked at it, I guess, more from a technology and networking point of view. And this very simple diagram just really describes, you know, what the intent was, which was understanding what kind of technology, including, say, the spectrum and frequencies that are needed, would provide a very high quality and optimum type of service, which connects effectively the smart meter deployed through an endpoint at the household across the network of masts, which are transmitters and receivers, providing the flow of data through to Arqiva's data center and onwards onto the water company. And really it was conceived, you know, on that basis about how do we just connect the meter to the service provider with the data. Next slide, please. And that thinking has clearly evolved. And as you've seen from Anglian Thames, a lot of work has gone in now into the receiving of that data and the processing of it and starting to really drive insights that can be acted upon. And essentially that's the real message that comes out of this, which is the network, and it might sound counterintuitive for me to be saying this, but it should just be there. It should just be always on, providing regular, consistent data, but you really shouldn't be worried about that. What you should be worried about is the ability to then process that data intelligently. And then as we move on to the right, how do you then not only use that as opportunities for perhaps driving efficiencies in your own business, but presenting that to customers on an hourly basis, quite typically, so that you can most identify continuous flow, it's already described, and therefore leakage reduction opportunities, but also start looking at the actual usage and consumption of individuals, and start using probably digital platforms to start nudging them or suggesting with them, but more frequent interaction with your customers to drive down the overall consumption levels. Next slide, please. So in summary, that's kind of it in terms of the network. You should be thinking not about a 15-year asset purchase. You should be thinking about how do I get high quality, frequent data over a period of 15 years that's going to drive the target reductions that I need to meet, and all of the benefits that are on the 5 boxes at the lowest part of that slide, which I think we've probably already covered. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. Why is this important? It's incredibly important, as we all know. Usage is increasing still, if in the low awareness category of the population, which is still the majority. and that trend continues, and we've seen it obviously increase, particularly during the COVID period, as many more people were at home. And the well-documented position around leaky loos, this is a very significant problem one way or another. The numbers around 110,000 to 140,000 litres per year from the average leaky loo. If you can fix those issues, that is a very significant saving to the overall consumption. And I think the next two parts are quite interesting, because the loss, as we know, across the network as a whole is around 3 billion litres a day. And we're going to need about 3.4 billion litres per day as we go forward. So in the ideal world, if you could solve one problem, you're fixing the other. It's slightly not real, because you're always going to have leakage. But if you can certainly address a large portion of it, then you're going some considerable way to meeting that target and avoiding a water deficit scenario. And the very last position is, well, it's been shown both in water and in energy smart metering that there's a very significant carbon reduction benefit that comes as a result. And we highlighted that actually in a previous report back in November 2021, and certainly by all means seek that out and to get more information on that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the approach and the considerations that you should really adopt, firstly, it's really about the quality of the data. And you need to assess what sort of quality that you actually want and what the benefits are and opportunities that presents to you. So clearly, if you've got high frequency data, you're going to be aware and be able to identify leakage much quicker. And by definition, you can then potentially target a resolution to that and reduce the amount of water that gets wasted in any particular leakage opportunity. Secondly, you really need to start thinking about a service that is a low or no regret option as part of the adaptive pathway that is the guidelines are very much coming from Ofwat at the moment. Meaning that look at a solution that can do more for you than just the initial, say, smart metering water consumption. Maybe it's additional services. Maybe it's about the possibility that frequent measurements give to new and flexible tariffing in the future. But basically make it a future-proof investment. Secondly, it's really important to select the right technology. These are going in the ground for 15 years. And as already described, it costs money to send people out to fix meters or to replace batteries or whatever it might be. So very important that a high quality meter is selected that's got a proven track record of lasting that period, and especially consider the battery life according to the different types of technologies that are out there, because it is variable. Next part is as well, there are off-cellular solutions, potentially, which can be part of either a hybrid or complementary to, say, a solution that Arqiva might provide and that Thames and Anglian using. But again, just be very aware that they do sunset, and we're going through a 2G, 3G sunset currently in the UK, and there's 4G. Will that really be around in 15 years' time? Lastly, think about the network itself and the performance of that network. It's very, very important to get into the detail of that and make sure that it is truly scalable, and you don't end up with getting a very noisy network that that has a high contention ratio in terms of sort of data management traffic that flows around it. Thirdly, very important to decide what you want to do and what you want someone else to do. So if I go back to the point around, this is about the provision of timely data and driving insights from that and engaging with customers, you may well decide that the majority of what you want to do is about investing in digital platforms and really creating much more frequent engagement with your customers to look at the consumption reduction and earlier leakage identification, rather than managing the solution yourself. I think you also need to look at, is it a proven solution? Currently, there is only really one fully proven solution at this type of scale. I think I'm right in saying that probably Thames is one of the largest deployments worldwide of AMI metering using Arqiva's technology in this instance. So it is a very proven technology. So you need to work with a provider who's got deep knowledge of smart metering and operating radio networks. And on that front, for example, we also provide all of the North and Scottish region for gas and electricity smart metering, which is just under 3 million smart meters deployed so far. Then start thinking about what is the service levels and agreements. As the dependency on data increases as we go forward, perhaps more of your operational processes are dependent on that data. The provision of that data and the timely provision of it becomes more and more important. So what sort of SLAs do you require, and what penalties do you want to put on that provider if they're not able to meet them? Fourthly, as we all know, we've gone through, and as highlighted earlier, I think around microprocessor supply issues. Work with a provider who really has deep insight, deep into the supply chain. It has been a challenging period, I think, for all industries over the last couple of years. But what is your supplier doing to ensure that you do get your fair share and supply of devices as we go forwards? It is a transient event, but it still exists as we sit today. Then a few other sort of final considerations, really. Now is the time to be acting. It's not too late to obviously start the program now, but it will be too late in 5 years' time if you're really going to make significant inroads into the targets that have been set. And therefore, this must be thought of not as a short-term issue. This should be, or a short-term fix and solution. It should be seen as a longer-term service that's provided. Clearly, this is critical as well. Cybersecurity is an ever-present threat. So again, work with a provider who has strong security credentials and can really demonstrate that the solutions provided are highly secure. And then I think the last point really is don't underestimate the amount of effort and time it takes to build the platforms, the data platforms, and the AI and the insights that get generated from that. And consider strongly, what are you going to do with that? How do you really engage with the customer with that data that's been provided? I think that's my time. So back to you, Karma. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. That was very insightful from your central position. And we will now all go into the Q&A section. So if I could ask all of our speakers to put their cameras back on, please. We currently have 14 questions in the Q&A. So let's try and get through as many of those as we possibly can. We've got about half an hour. So I will start with the top question from David Gregson. Are there plans to make metering compulsory, bearing in mind future demand issues, and to enable an effective smart program? You might think that would be a sensible thing to do. Who would like to start us off on that one? Andrew, could I pick on you to start us off on that one?
So we're already going through a compulsory program, so I'm just it's almost like, oh, I wish DEFRA and EA were on the panel right now, because ultimately it's their call when it comes to policy. So compulsory metering programs can be approached when a water company, wholesale water company, is in an area classified by the EA as under serious water stress. It's now, southern half, most of the southern half of the country falls into that there. You've still got to go through a process to get that approved. And that doesn't mean smart metering, that's just compulsory metering, and it's up to the individual companies to choose the technology that they go down. So I would point out that I think metering has copped a bad rap, and it's probably there's a lot of extra political type of things around it that have prevented it. The rest of the world has got this nailed. All right, we're a laggard by a mile. No one else around the world has compulsory metering or metering linked to what color crayon is used on a map. Okay, so we do need to move away from that. This is metering, and smart metering in particular is an enabler for all the things that we're trying to do. National water target coming. Can we actually achieve a national water target without actually knowing where our water is going? Question. Can we hit leakage targets without actually having full metering out there of seeing things live? Question. So metering is simply an enabler. The concerns around metering onto a property and so forth comes to the tariffing. That's an entirely separate thing, and shouldn't be the things that prevent a piece of kit to simply measure where water is going and not going. That's our view, but we're already in that stage. But it does take, still going from the policy to the regulatory, a great deal of effort to do cost benefit and justification to get through that process. Whereas I would look at it and go, maybe we need a different view, and just say, right, by a certain date, 2035 or 2030, just get the meters out there, then we can start playing around with the data better. But I mean, everyone on the call, on the panel so far, is absolutely right. It's a challenging situation, and please, as Peter said, that do not underestimate the level of effort that is required to turn data into insight, into action.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. Dean. Dean, you're still on mute.
Just realised that. Sorry. I think just also to add onto what Andrew's just said is that You can still put meters in the ground, but not put customers onto the metered tariff, and that will get some of those benefits. You'll be able to see where all the water is going. You'll be able to identify properties where you've got suspected underground supply pipe leaks. What that won't allow you to do, though, is to have the benefits of providing that data to the customer, and the tariff potential future tariff benefits that you might get, and the behavioural piece is much harder to engage if the customer doesn't have their bill through a smart meter. So I would agree with everything Andrew said, is that why don't we have this? I don't think we're going to see a compulsory metering mandated by government in the near future. DEFRA has its consultation out on the target for water demand reduction by 2037. It might form responses as part of that, but I think it's a really good question, and one that we can't really answer in full.
Okay, well, thanks for trying. Okay, so I've just reordered the questions so that they're in order of the most popular. So I think we'll do that. That way we'll get through the ones that most people want to hear. So the next one is from Mike Stokes. My energy smart meter just sits in my utility room and I rarely look at it. How do you make sure the same doesn't happen with water smart meters, if you're lucky enough to get one? Andrew.
So there were some fantastic lessons from Anglian. They ran a trial years ago around an in-home display. The energy sector have to have in-home displays. Water sector has kind of moved away from that. Water metering and smart metering, energy smart metering are very different things. Our meters sit out buried in the street, buried in the pavement, exposed to environmental things, and don't have a power supply. So it makes it a very challenging process to get data back to the mothership. When it comes to the in-home display thing, you'll see the data coming back, rather it going directly to the customer on an in-home display, which you're right, there's no guarantee that it'll be looked at or even put on the bench and operated. You'll see we're all kind of focusing on data comes back to us. How do I get it to an app? The big thing around this thing is we've still got a population that don't really understand this issue particularly well. So the success where we've seen internationally on smart metering and engagement is not necessarily just the provision of the data somewhere. Fine, you can do that. Anyone can build a graph. The real success is off the proactive push. People don't typically wake up in the morning and go, oh, I can't wait to jump on my water company website. Yeah. No, it's typically off the utility reaching out to that customer every week, every fortnight, push, nudge, 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 nudge. That's the thing that we've got to focus on and steer them towards other digital means.
Thanks, Andrew. Nathan?
Yeah, I'd just add, I think the key thing is making the data useful for people. I think it will be down the sort of app line for utilities for water, for example, rather than having a device sitting on the side of the cupboard. But yeah, making the information useful, using it in a proactive way. So it's not just there to collect information for the water company to help it do stuff. It's there in the other direction as well to help flag a leak for a customer, or to compare their water use with others with similar size houses or similar in their neighborhoods, try and sort of help motivate them, and also use linking it to more sort of targeted advice based on sort of patterns of their usage.
Yeah, it's a really key question, isn't it? How you get people to engage. Martin?
I think the same applies to the non-household market as well. We would love to see a position where we stop talking about the need for smart meters and long unread meters in the market. It would be much nicer to be in a position where retailers are developing the data, developing data services, and developing improved sort of leakage and water efficiency services for customers. And the only way they can do that is by using good quality data and managing the way in which they present that back to their customers. So very similar for the non-household market.
Yes, thanks for drawing that parallel. I'll move on to the next question then, which is sort of related, but do you feel we have to reposition water smart meters to remove some of the negativity caused by energy smart metering? Is there a different way to sell it? If no one's going to volunteer, perhaps Peter, I'll come to you because you've obviously got energy experience.
Yeah, I think actually the point has probably already been made, which is there has perhaps been a negative experience for some around the use of smart meters in the energy world. I think it has got considerably better, particularly with the SMETS 1 to SMETS 2 transition probably didn't help. People had to kind of readjust to that. The in-house display is perhaps not the most effective way, I would suggest, of engaging with your customer either. And certainly providing that kind of usage data via an app or via the website, and going back to the point of it's all about engaging with your customer. Think of this as a customer service and customer engagement enabler. So I think that's the key here to making sure that water smart metering gets a take up and engagement that perhaps energy doesn't. Although I think that's changing, of course, with the very specific cost of living squeeze that we're all feeling right now. People probably are re-engaging with that type of information, and what they really want to do is learn about how they can adjust their behaviour, I suspect, to reduce their usage.
Great, thank you. Nathan, would you have anything to add on that? We often look to energy efficiency to learn, don't we, for water efficiency? So this is a sort of a different kind of learning.
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing I would say from our research is that smart meter, smart tech is normal now. It is the new normal in people's houses and their sort of lives. So over 90% of customers that we've surveyed have smart tech in their house, in their hands, and water's not there at the moment. We're not in that game. So that's where the smart metering is a game changer, really, because it brings it into the sort of 21st century. And as I said in my presentation, people who have access to that information, the smart metering data, they're much more connected with their water use based on the findings that we have from our social research, and they're much more likely to do something about it. And CCW, in their research that they published last year, found that people with smart meters are about 4 times more likely to fit devices that can save water. So there's a compelling sort of amount of evidence. I think it's just catch up, really, and getting smart with water like we have with other services.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Peter, did you want to add something?
Yes, I mean, the other quick thought actually on this is that what we've got to do is try and avoid getting some apathy, because there's too many points of engagement across your whole utility portfolio as a consumer. So currently, you might have to engage with a smart app that controls your home, your heating, maybe your electricity and gas consumption, your water consumption, and so on. And it's really as a thought around, as we move forwards as an industry over a 10 to 15 year period, perhaps how do we get more integrated kind of presentation to each individual customer, so it's just less hassle effectively for them to be able to start managing and monitoring.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next question, which is for Doug and Andrew. Can you ever see a time when block tariffs are used because smart meters would allow you to do this? So Doug, perhaps I'll come to you first.
Super. Yeah, at the moment, no. We inevitably, and I know Andrew will have sat in the same rooms with the same people at Thames, we've debated long and hard about what additional leveraging we can get from smart meters, and tariffs is always on that agenda. But they can be as damaging as they are beneficial. I think we have a very different challenge in the water industry around using tariffs to control the kind of demand that gives us problems. I mean, our problem is 4 hot, dry weeks in the middle of the summer turning into 6 and 8 dry weeks in the summer, alongside, for us, about 18 months of below average rainfall. Now, that's not something that a tactical daily block tariff is going to change. I think that there's potentially a difference between the household and non-household market. For many years, Anglian Water has had the interruptible tariff, where our non-household customers paid less, but under the notion that on a bad day we could turn them off. and that still sort of exists through the retailer arrangements that we have at Anglian. So in the short term, I don't see Anglian looking at tariffs, and certainly it comes back very similarly to the point Andrew was making earlier on about compulsory metering. There is compulsory metering, universal metering, and there is universal tariffing, and they're two very different things.
Thank you, Doug. Did you want to add anything to that, Andrew?
Yeah, so block tariffs are the most common type of tariff structure around the world. We've got a linear tariff, so we're still a little bit of an outlier there. It's very rare that the actual tariff is used within the top 10 things of demand reduction by companies and utilities and governments around the world to reduce demand. There's engagement, there's fixing stuff, there's education, behavior change, and then the tariffing thing kicks in. But what they've never done, and you look at all the different block tariffs around the world, most of them, 99% of them, haven't really structured the block in the right way, nor the actual tariff increase the right way. And the only reason that the smart metering agenda here could potentially play a role in driving a more innovative tariff structure is off the engagement by telling people, hey, you're approaching your next block. And then if you go above that, it's going to increase by this. That engagement hasn't really happened for many places around the world when it comes to a block tariff. So we just need to be quite careful around we need to stick block tariffs in. There's a long process. We need to investigate customer engagement. We've done stuff in the past. We need to do more stuff. There is an opportunity we need to explore, and don't write it off. But at the moment, there are lots of extra basics that we've got to get right. On the non-household thing, totally agree with Doug. That's probably the first cab off the block. And for the simple reason is that the non-household tariffing structure that we've got here is built off a certain legacy process of linked to the asset cost. But our tariffing for non-households UK is the opposite of the rest of the world. We're actually rewarding people with a lower cost for the more water they use. That's got to change.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Rob?
Yeah, just to add to that, I wouldn't disagree with anything Andrew or Doug said. I think, one of the themes that came through our report was how metering connects all different elements of water companies' decision together. And if we look forward, I think affordability and fairness is going to become more and more important. The cost of dealing with the CSO issues and net zero and so on. There's very ambitious agendas for investment and so on. And balancing that with affordability across different segments of the customer base, we in 10 years' time, we may look at it and think social tariffs by themselves don't give all the flexibility we need. And at that point, if you've got meters and you've got AMI, you have options for tariffs that you don't have if you don't have if you just have dumb metering technology. So it may be that block tariffs actually come back more from an affordability and a fairness angle than a shifting behavior angle.
That's very interesting. Okay, thank you. The next question is from Martin. And Martin, perhaps if you want to pick anything up about the tariffs as well, you can do that when you respond. But the next question is, it says it's relatively easy for wholesalers to install meters on domestic properties. Due to all the hands-off, presumably in the retail market, it is much harder to install smart meters on non-households. What can Mosel do to help?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One of the things we're sort of thinking about quite clearly at the moment is how much can we have a consistent approach between households and non-households? And we are quite concerned that there perhaps isn't a sort of a common set of thinking in the market and across the business at the moment. For example, DEFRA have recently announced that they'd like to see a 9% reduction in consumption in the non-household market, but a 20% reduction in the household market. We don't understand why they've made that differentiation. Surely what we should be looking for is a consistent reduction across all demand. And then it's for wholesalers to determine where they can get the most cost benefit in terms of applying their work. So I think, leveling up is the first thing I think that we think would be a good approach. Secondly, as I mentioned in the presentation, I think there's a difference between the smaller meters and the larger meters. Smaller meters are very much like household meters. I don't think it is particularly difficult to install a smart meter for a smaller non-household meter. There clearly needs to be discussion between retailers and wholesalers. And I think by and large, that discussion does already take place. So I think for me, the biggest challenge is on the larger meters. Large meters, to do work on large meters can often be very difficult. Quite often it's difficult to access the site. If the meter has to be replaced, that in itself is a really difficult challenge because quite often the water supply has to be turned off. And quite often the customer won't allow access to the site or for the water to be turned off, except for very, very sort of short periods of time, perhaps overnight. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on the larger meters, and I think that's where we'd like to see the focus. And from a Mosel point of view, we are keen to talk to non-household larger customers. We're working with MEUC and understanding what their views are, and we're trying to do further work with large customers to understand just how can this market change for the better. I notice one of the other questions talks about that a number of non-households have loggers attached to them. Yes, they do, but not that many. I think there's only about 7% of the non-household meters have a logger attached. Loggers are there for a particular purpose, for leakage, and the data is usually not shared between the different parties. So we'd like to see more sharing of data where it is collected in the market, and I think that will sort of help the situation as well. There's quite a bit of work we're also doing around reviewing the technology. So we're looking at just what is the range of technologies that are out there at the moment, because obviously the wholesaler may take their approach, but a retailer or a customer may wish to do something slightly different. So we'd like to sort of try and, we can't standardize the technology, but we'd like to normalize it a bit more. And we've also been doing quite a big piece of work around the roles and responsibilities for metering in the non-household market, and looking at what are the opportunities to introduce smart meters more effectively and for data sharing. So I think there's a lot that can be done. You picked up on the tariff point of view. Interestingly, there is a piece of work going on with through one of the market improvement funded projects to look for tariff simplification in the non-household market, and I suspect that will be the major focus to begin with. However, then there is opportunities, I think, once smart meters are in place, for retailers to work with customers to look at alternative tariff arrangements. But I think that's some way off yet. I think there's quite a few challenges around that. So hopefully I've covered quite a few things.
Yeah, you have, Martin. Thank you. It was brilliant. You've covered lots of things there. Right, I'm going to move on to the next question, which I quite like, I have to admit. To all speakers, do you have a message for Ofwat on how seriously they should take supporting a smart water meter rollout during the next AMP or PR24? What is the risk that the opportunity is missed? So, Andrew, thank you, volunteering first, giving everyone else a chance to think.
It's a great question, but it's a challenging situation. So I mean, Ofwat might be on the call, so I can't speak on behalf of them, but they've got a regulatory process, and a lot of it is based on cost benefit within a certain amount of price constraint, and deliver benefits to customers, the environment, and deliver a resilient system. So you've got a well-defined structure process there. If you miss the boat now, you've got 5 years, then you lose. So the consequence is that you've got households and businesses that might get a dumb meter installed in 2025, or maybe all the way through to 2030. And that's 15-year asset life. And then that place there won't be considering smarts until 2045. There's your consequence. So if you reverse engineer back off that, but then you've got a complete, almost a total absence in policy driver. So Ofwat are going to have taken, implementing policy in some cases. So you've got a strategic policy drive from DEFRA, which doesn't have anything on this at the moment. So then Ofwat might take a position of, well, it's up to the companies to then put forward what they think needs to be going into in their business case in that part of the geography for that type of customer base. So it's this particular agenda. We're all trying to reduce leaks as fast as we can, drive down demand. We've got a national target coming our way in water, and yet most of those things are going to be completely reliant on the data from smart metering. So the smart metering agenda runs the risk of kind of just organically drifting on, as opposed to someone upstairs going, righto, enough's enough, I need them all on the ground by this date. That lack of policy drive, and it doesn't make the regulatory environment any easier. So hopefully I'm not standing on anyone's toes there, but it's just being honest about it.
Thank you. I'll come to the others who've got your hand up, but just to add a little question that's just occurred to me while Andrew was talking, which is, do we think there's any opportunity for investing in AMI outside of the normal 5-year AMPs as well? I mean, a bit like we've seen some green recovery investment outside of the usual cycle. So I just wondered if that's a possibility as well. Nathan, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, so I think our sort of headline message is we need to get on with this. It's urgent. There's so much evidence now of the benefits. So it'd be more, it's about pace, because I think we will get there, but it's about pace for me, really. So that would be my headline message. And linked to that, I mean, their long-term planning guidance originally had smart meter rollout for 2045, and they've pulled that back since the draft to 2035. So I think this events like this and the messages from the reports, etc. I think they are getting through. There's been a lot of engagement with Ofwat over the last few months and over the next month or so. So I'm hoping it's sinking in, and I'm hoping we'll see them encouraging a faster paced rollout in the next AMP. Okay, thank you. I'm sure you're not alone there. Dean?
I mean, there's lots to say on this in the report that we published, but if we just bring it back to basics, I think one question is it right that in 8 years' time, most people still won't have any access to their consumption data? And, you know, water companies are still going about leakage detection on CSPLs in a very inefficient way. And I think if we look at the data that Doug presented earlier on the number of supply pipe leaks they found through their smart metering work in over and above the background level that they typically find through their active leakage control methods, then I think it shows some real benefits.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, just a quick add-on. So I think the business case for putting smart meters in the ground without doing any of the kind of even customer billing on the back of it based on usage is still there. And we showed that actually in a previous report that Dean and Rob were party to back in November last year. So I think as long as there isn't any kind of muddling up between does that mean enforced usage billing for customers? It doesn't have to be there initially at this point, because the cost benefits are available just from a leakage only point of view.
Thank you. I think in view of time, I'll move on to the next question. And Martin, I'll come to you first. And if you want to wrap them together, you can. So the next question from Janet Manning. She says, much of the outside water use in both the domestic and non-household market could be switched to rainwater harvesting, which would also help in wastewater management and possibly storm overflows. Is anyone using meter data to target customers with high outdoor water use specifically? So I'll come to Martin and then I'll go to Doug.
I think
Martin,
yeah, I think the whole area of sort of rainwater harvesting is absolutely vital. There is a number of different opportunities, and all of these opportunities have got to be included together. Clearly there are non-household uses such as golf courses, stadiums and the like that use a lot of water externally. And the way in which they can best use that water and make better use of sort of rainwater harvesting and other options, and other local water resources, clearly just plays a part in all of this. I also just wanted to sort of go back to the Ofwat position, in that my view is that we're interested, going into a very interesting economic situation at the moment. There will be pressures, I believe, on Ofwat to reduce bills to water customers because of what's happening with energy bills at the moment. So therefore, I think it is absolutely imperative on PR24 and the water companies putting their PR24 plans that they are as strong and as clear and as positive as they can be, because I think the bids, if you like, for money are going to be very challenging in this period. So yeah, that was all I wanted to cover there.
Great, thank you. Doug?
Yeah, I think for the non-household market, it's an absolute no-brainer, and both Thames and Anglian established retailer liaison groups that we have here, and I definitely think this is somewhere we're going to want to go next, because it's the kind of things that saves those non-household customer bills huge quantities, as Martin's just spoken about. I'm a little bit more wary when it comes to the household market, in that obviously I'm a great advocate of smart metering. I have energy smart meters as well, but anything along the lines of profiling starts to make our customers quite justifiably very concerned. I mean, I am the data owner for Anglian Water for this data, and we have to work so slowly and so carefully in building our systems, and at the same time building the privacy impact assessments. And they go, you can't build one without the other, you can't complete one without the other. And there's a little bit about this that just says to me, the day that we start sending letters to customers saying, you seem to use your hose pipe a lot out in the back garden, would you like to consider putting up? A lot of customers would probably welcome that advice, but I think that it would take a lot of customers to the point where they might well want to switch off their smart meter. So I would be a little bit wary of it. Certainly there is one water company for whom this is a real issue, and I think once they procure their smart meter program, they would probably be the first to perhaps go down this route.
Yeah, something to manage carefully, isn't it? I might stick with you, Doug, actually, for the next question, if I may, which is from Thomas Munch-Lawson. He says, learning from Denmark about intelligent water meters and customer involvement is that not everyone reacts to a leak registered from a smart meter. Particularly vulnerable people do not necessarily respond to messages from the water companies. It's not really a question, but maybe just if you want to reflect on that, because I think you did mention that a lot of your customers did respond to leaks once you alerted them to them.
Yeah, no, that's good, because I saw this comment and sort of question earlier on and thought it was an interesting one. Yeah, I have no idea what the legislative powers in Denmark are for water companies, but here in the UK, Section 93 of the Water Industry Act places a responsibility on us to drive down leakage, including customers' properties, and then Section 75 gives us the powers of entry to do so. And without doubt, I mean, our AMI smart metering program, the customer leakage element of that would not run anywhere near as well as it has over the last few years if we hadn't established our customer leakage support team in 2013, and we had a really bedded in, smooth and calm process for, as we find, about 90% of our customers tell them once and that's it, they will repair their leak. Move to the first steps of enforcement notices under Section 75, and you get 90% of the remaining 10. So you get the next 9% onto the last. Move to the final stage of noticing, and that's it. It mops up all but a very few. And we do then, Anglian does then follow through and go to magistrates' courts to get warrants, but it's a tiny number compared with the number of leaks. Now, if Denmark doesn't have the same kind of legislative powers for water companies, which I can imagine because it's a more commercial arrangement rather than our regulated business here in the UK, I can imagine it's tough. But over here, no, it's rare, but because we have these escalating powers, we see a good high success rate.
Great, thank you. Next question, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more. Next question is for Dean and Rob. Actually, there's quite a few questions here. So maybe if you could answer, one of you could answer sort of briefly, and then you might want to pick it up offline. He's basically asking, what assumptions did you make about technological costs in the future? Is the assumption that costs will go up or down? Is the assumption that water companies will use masts that are already installed? Are there any areas, maybe very rural areas, where AMI was not as beneficial as AMR or dumb meters? So it's quite a lot there. I don't know if you could maybe just answer fairly briefly, and maybe you could type an answer for the other parts.
Thanks, Tom. If I do a very brief answer. So in terms of the costs, we basically assume those were constant in real terms over the period. So we didn't assume any inflation or deflation relative to general price levels. In terms of the questions around rural and masts, I think the detail of that might be best answered by others, but essentially we didn't make any distinction along those lines. What we did do is assume a penetration rate of 80% in each area as the kind of the where the rollout got to, and I think you can interpret that in one sense as in urban areas there's a challenge for higher penetration around the proportion of flats and properties you can meter and get access to, and then in very rural areas there's a challenge in terms of whether the coverage of the comms technology takes you everywhere. So it may be that those things balance out in a sense, and certainly in terms of the research we didn't find anything that gave a compelling reason to shift that assumption, but I don't know whether any of the other panelists want to add to that.
I think in view of time, we'll just move on. There's two questions I want to get to. I'm going to put them together and those will be our last questions. So the first one is, should meter suppliers stop providing traditional dumb meters from, say, 2024? And I suppose the flip side, I don't know if it's the same person who's asked the question, but what is the argument for water companies still considering dumb and AMR meters in their options appraisal for WRMP 24? I mean, I suppose a lot of the evidence does suggest it's a bit of a no-brainer to go to AMI. So what are the arguments for other meter options still being considered? Doug and Martin, have you still got your hand up for this one, or is that? No, I think I'll go to Doug first. Martin, if you want to speak, put your hand back up. Thanks.
Well, yeah, I was busy typing an answer to the first. I thought, well, I might as well say it because I think I can still talk quicker than I type. The answer is no. We are still going to need mechanical and pulsing visual read meters for quite some time to come. Certainly in the non-household market, there is a lot of inertia there to get over, and also, considering in the round, we've talked about missed opportunity and the need to get smart metering out there and all of the peripheral benefits, but there's still, and I can step outside the England and Wales regulatory framework for a moment, there is still precious little argument in Scotland for meters full stop, let alone eye-wateringly expensive AMI smart meters. So no, the visual read meters, AMR meters to AMI meters, it's a natural succession, and it's going to take certainly more than 2 years to get to the point where we are not at the first step of that succession yet.
Okay, that was nice and clear. Thank you, Doug. Andrew, sorry, I see you're typing an answer to the one about whether water companies should still be considering dumb and AMR. Do you want to just quickly voice that?
I think Doug nailed that perfectly. I mean, there's still there's still a need for it. I mean, manufacturers will still produce it if there's a market for it and people are still asking for it. So, from a pure water resource management point of view, the more data you've got, the better. Whether you still want to call these things smart in the future is another question around this thing. It's just that all these meters are doing is providing more data more regularly. The smart bit comes from how you use the data and then go and implement stuff. So, we just having that data granularity is of increasing benefit going forward, and how it gets to you is almost irrelevant. You need to make use of it in the best possible way, but just don't underestimate how difficult it is to get there. It's a very challenging environment to do this. I mean, we'll have, at 2035, we want to have every household and non-household connection that we can physically meter. We want them smart metered by that time. But it means that we'll probably still have about 1 million individual properties that are unmetered because of the physical challenging environment. Shared supply, communal hot water systems, 4 pipes going into 1 converted flat. There's current technology and whether it's physical technology or digital, just means that a lot of properties in the UK will remain unmeterable for a very long time, but we need to maximize what we can do now as fast as we can.
Brilliant. That's a good note to end on. Nathan, I see you've got your hand up. I'll ask you to be brief because we're 1 minute over time and I'll get in trouble if I run over.
Yeah, what I was going to say, Karma, on that snowball slide that I presented, there's definitely been a shift in tone from government and regulators. And I think the default now is that it's, you know, companies should be planning if they can make the business case for smart metering or making the justification for why they can't do it. So it's sort of flipped 180, I think.
Yes, that's great. Okay, fabulous. Right, we are just over time. Thank you all so much for your contributions. I will have to draw the meeting to a close now. I think it's been a really great session. It's great to see more evidence coming forward for AMI, despite the complexities and so on that we've just touched on. I think what will happen at PR24 will be really fascinating, and I'm sure we will all be keeping a really close eye on that. So just briefly, thank you to SciWem for hosting. Thank you to Arqiva, to Artesia and to Frontier for supporting, and just a personal thanks to all the speakers. So thank you very much to Rob and Dean, to Doug and Andrew, to Nathan, Martin and to Peter. And there's also people behind the scenes, Laura from Arqiva and Barbara from SciWem, who've been doing a lot of work on this. So thank you to those guys as well for getting everything organised. There are lots of links in the chat. I see Barbara's been doing that throughout, so you can access a lot more information there. And other than that, I just say thank you very much for taking part. Thank you for your questions, and have a great afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.